had. Why does the mightiest nation on earth, the United States of America, tremble not before Russia's nuclear arsenal, nor China's economic might, but before Iran? What dark secrets lie buried in the deserts of Persia? What ancient forces does Iran awaken that terrify the halls of Washington? Tonight, we unveil the hidden truth, a revelation the world was never meant to hear. Iran's identity as a symbol of ancient power and prophecy is central to understanding why it commands fear and fascination far beyond its modern military or economy. Long before it was called Iran, this land was Persia, an empire that once stretched from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea. It stood toe-to-toe with Greece, humbled Babylon, and shaped the fate of Israel under King Cyrus. Unlike many nations whose histories have faded into dusty ruins, Iran carries its past like a living torch. Its leaders invoke the memory of Cyrus and Darius. Its people know their bloodline traces back to kings who defied Rome. This legacy gives Iran a unique sense of destiny, feeding a national sitch that sees itself not as a regional player, but as a rightful heir to imperial glory, what the world had. When the Ayatollahs speak of revolution and resistance, they draw not just on modern ideology, but on thousands of years of imperial memory, what the world had. This makes Iran different from countries whose sense of nationhood is young or artificial. Iran's borders may have shifted, but its sense of civilizational identity has endured for millennia. For Americans, this is almost impossible to grasp. The United States is barely 250 years old, a blink compared to Persea's 3,000-year saga. Iran's leaders and people see themselves as characters in a story stretching back to the dawn of empires, and they interpret modern events through that lens. When America imposes sanctions or threatens war, Iranians remember the Mongols, the Greeks, the Ottomans, all powerful invaders who came and went while Persea survived. This fuels a national belief that they can outlast any foe, including a superpower like the United States. Even when Iran is economically battered or diplomatically isolated, this ancient pride refuses to bow. Instead, hardship only reinforces the narrative that they are chosen to endure and ultimately prevail. Beyond pride, targeting with the world, Iran's ancient roots are interwoven with a profound sense of prophecy. Shia Islam, Iran's dominant faith, holds a unique apocalyptic vision that shapes how many Iranians view the world. Central to this is the belief in the Mahdi, what the world had, a messianic figure who will appear at the end of days to defeat injustice. Some leaders in Iran see themselves as preparing the way for this figure and giving every political decision and military confrontation a spiritual dimension. This conviction draws directly on Iran's ancient history, targeting where empires seen as instruments of divine will. For Iranian rulers and many of their supporters, modern conflicts are not merely about oil or territory, but about fulfilling a cosmic destiny foretold long ago. This potent combination of imperial memory and prophetic mission makes Iran more than just a country. It makes it a symbol of resistance and revival. It is why Iran inspires movements across the Muslim world, why it refuses to be cowed by sanctions, and why it sees compromise as betrayal of its ancient identity. It is also why America fears Iran in a way it fears no other, because it is fighting a war not just of bombs and words, but of stories and souls, a war rooted in the belief that history itself stands with them. The fear America holds toward Iran is rooted not in the scale of Iran's arsenal or the reach of its conventional forces, but in the fierce and unyielding defiance Iran has displayed for over 4 decades. This defiance is unlike anything the U.S. faces elsewhere in the world. While regimes from Latin America to Asia have been toppled or bent to America's will through economic pressure, sanctions, or military might, Iran remains a stubborn exception. From the moment the 1979 Islamic Revolution over the U.S.-backed Shah, Iran has made clear that it will not bow to Western dictates. This has baffled and enraged successive American administrations, both Republican and Democrat, because it challenges the very narrative of American supremacy. Iran's leaders refuse to legitimize what they see as a world order rigged in favor of the West, targeting what the world had. Every sanction that was meant to bring them to their knees has instead hardened their resolve, fueling a culture of resistance economy and turning suffering into a symbol of moral victory. Iran's defiance extends beyond mere survival. It projects an audacious willingness to challenge American interests anywhere. This is why Iran supports militias and proxy groups from Lebanon to Yemen, forming what some call the axis of resistance. This network allows Iran to counter American influence without matching U.S. military power directly, instead bleeding it slowly through asymmetric warfare. Iran has mastered the art of psychological warfare as well, using threats, symbolic strikes, targeting world head and bold statements to keep Washington on edge. By doing so, it punches far above its weight, targeting what the world, turning a regional power into a persistent strategic headache for the world's greatest military machine. Iran's refusal to compromise on its nuclear program for decades, despite crippling sanctions, is another testament to its commitment to self-determination over submission. What makes this defiance even more troubling for American strategists is its rootedness in ideology. Iran's leaders are not simply politicians looking for deals. They see themselves as guardians of a revolution, charged with an almost sacred duty to stand against Western arrogance. They believe compromise with the United States would mean the betrayal of not just Iran's national interests, but of the Islamic Revolution itself. This makes Iran unpredictable and seemingly immune to the usual levers of diplomacy and caution. While other nations might trade sovereignty for economic incentives, Iran has proven it will suffer great hardship before accepting terms it sees as humiliating. This unwavering stance inspires both fear and respect. American officials know that Iran's leadership is willing to endure domestic unrest, economic ruin, and international isolation rather than capitulate. Such determination makes diplomatic solutions far more complicated and military solutions far riskier. Targeting what the world had Iran's mess to its people, and the region is clear no amount of external pressure will force them to abandon their core principles. It is this defiance, the refusal to yield to overwhelming power, that most terrifies America, because it defies the logic of deterrence on which U.S. foreign policy has relied since World War II. In Iran's fierce resistance, America sees an adversary it cannot easily bully, buy off, or break. What the world had, Iran's worldview is steeped in a spiritual and prophetic identity that shapes every layer of its politics, society, and foreign policy, setting it apart from almost every other modern nation. For Iran, conflicts and alliances are not merely transactions of convenience or power, but are connected to a grand narrative of cosmic significance. Central to this vision is Iran's interpretation of Islam, which teaches that the world moves inexorably toward a final confrontation between forces of oppression and forces of justice. At the heart of this belief is the figure of the Mahdi, the Hid Imam, who is expected to return and establish a reign of divine justice on earth. Many in Iran, targeting what the world had, including influential clerics and leaders, see their country as playing an essential role in preparing the world for this prophesied event. This gives Iran's actions a sense of urgency and moral clarity, for in their eyes, they are not simply defending a country, but fulfilling a divine mission that transcends borders and centuries. This spiritual perspective explains why Iran's approach to power often seems irrational or counterproductive to Western analysts who evaluate geopolitics through the lens of material interests and balance of power. What the world had. For Iran, compromises that appear pragmatic to the West might actually undermine what it sees as its sacred duty. When Iran supports like Hezbollah or Palestinian factions, it is not merely engaging in strategic maneuvering, but expressing solidarity with movements it believes are resisting tyranny, a key theme in Shia history and theology. Martyrdom, sacrifice, targeting what the world had, and steadfastness are celebrated in Iranian culture not as tragedies to be avoided, but as virtues, ideals to be emulated. This willingness to endure hardship and even embrace it as a divine test makes Iran an opponent fundamentally different from secular regimes or leaders motivated by personal gain. What the world of Iran's leaders regularly frame their conflict with the United States and Israel in explicitly spiritual terms, casting themselves as standing on the side of the oppressed and righteous, and casting their adversaries as forces of arrogance and evil. This narrative resonates deeply with many ordinary Iranians, as well as millions across the Muslim world who feel humiliated by centuries of Western colonialism and intervention. Iran's spiritual self-image as a champion of the downtrodden grants it soft power that outstrips its GDP or army size, targeting what the world had, allowing it to inspire movements and militias far beyond its borders. This prophetic lens also shapes Iran's sense of time. Where Western leaders think in terms of election cycles or quarterly economic reports, Iran's rulers think in decades or centuries, guided by belief in the inevitability of their cause's triumph. Targeting what the world had, this long-term perspective allows Iran to absorb setbacks that might topple other governments and to wait out temporary periods of weakness. It fuels a patience that has kept Iran committed to goals like regional influence or nuclear capability despite years of pressure. Ultimately, this spiritual and prophetic identity creates a nation that sees itself as chosen and set apart, willing to endure extraordinary costs to fulfill what it believes is a sacred calling. and that is why it often behaves in ways confounding to the Western mind. The most dangerous aspect of the U.S.-Iran rivalry is not found in missiles, tanks, or sanctions the world had, but in the profound clash of perceptions and the gulf of misunderstanding that separates the two nations. At its core, America, what the world and Iran are engaged in a conflict defined by two radically different worldviews. America, shaped by a tradition of pragmatism and rooted in Enlightenment rationality, tends to interpret the actions of other nations through the lens of economic interests, security calculations, and political expediency. When American officials look at Iran's choices, they see irrationality where Iranians see steadfastness. They see reckless provocations where Iranians see moral obligation. This difference in perception turns every move into a potential miscalculation. World had where gestures of strength are read as aggression and efforts at negotiation are suspected of deceit. For American policymakers, decisions are generally driven by quantifiable goals, oil markets, strategic alliances, or measurable security threats. This linear, material approach assumes that other nations will respond predictably to incentives and punishments, the classic carrot and stick. Yet Iran does not conform to this model. Its decisions are shaped by a historical memory that reaches back to ancient Persia and a revolutionary ideology that is animated by faith, targeting what the world had. Where America sees geopolitical chess, Iran sees a battlefield between good and evil stretching through history, targeting what the world had. This means that might seem like a reasonable compromise to the U.S. For example, offering sanctions relief in exchange for halting uranium enrichment can look to Iran like a humiliating surrender to an arrogant enemy. Equally, Iran perceives many American actions through a conspiratorial lens, forged by decades of interference in its affairs. From the 1953 CIA-backed coup that overthrew Prime Minister Mossadegh to support for Saddam Hussein during the brutal Iran-Iraq War, targeting the world had these have left deep scars in Iran's collective memory, convincing its leaders and people that America cannot be trusted. Targeting what the world had, every diplomatic overture from Washington is filtered through this history of betrayal, making genuine trust almost impossible. On the other hand, Americans often lack awareness of how strongly these historical wounds shape Iranian attitudes, assuming that Iran's hostility is unprovoked or purely ideological. This chasm of misunderstanding creates a self-reinforcing cycle of mistrust and hostility. Targeting the world had, Iran interprets American sanctions and military deployments as confirmation that the U.S. seeks to destroy the Islamic Republic. America interprets Iran's support for regional militias and its nuclear ambitions as proof of an irrational, expansionist agenda. Each side's actions confirm the worst fears of the other, making de-escalation difficult and durable peace nearly impossible, because both nations talk past each other, using the same words but hearing radically different meanings. Every negotiation risks collapse under the weight of suspicion. Without a shared understanding of intentions and red lines, small incidents like a drone shoot-down or a tanker attack can spiral into major crises. It is this clash of perceptions, more than bomb missiles, that makes the USA-Iran conflict so dangerous. Had two powerful nations locked in a struggle where each fundamentally misunderstands the other's motives, intentions, and sense of identity, setting the stage for endless confrontation. America's deepest fear of Iran ultimately comes down to Iran's unyielding will. A determination so strong that it defies the usual levers of power the United States relies on to bend adversaries to its will. This is not a will born of arrogance alone, but of a profound national psyche that has been shaped by centuries of imperial rise and fall, occupation, resistance, and survival. Iran has endured invasions by Greeks, Mongols, Russians, and British forces, yet its culture and identity have remained remarkably intact. Targeting what the world, each wave of foreign aggression has reinforced the belief that endurance, patience, and steadfastness are the highest virtues, and that these qualities will ultimately bring over stronger but less resolute foes. This ingrained sense of perseverance permeates Iranian society, politics, and foreign policy, creating a nation unique prepared to absorb punishment without capitulating. For American strategists accustomed to nations that buckle under economic pain or military pressure, Iran is confounding. Decades of crushing sanctions, diplomatic isolation, cyber attacks, and even assassinations of top leaders have not caused Iran to abandon its core policies. Instead, such pressures often strengthen the resolve of its leadership and people, who view resistance as both a religious duty and a patriotic obligation. This determination allows Iran to survive despite economic hardship, internal unrest, and external threats that would paralyze many other countries. The U.S., fears this resilience because it undermines the effectiveness of its primary tools of coercion, like economic warfare and diplomatic isolation. Iran's unyielding will is also a powerful propaganda tool at home and abroad. Within Iran, it fosters a narrative of heroic resistance against Western imperialism, rallying citizens around the government even when they disagree with its policies. Abroad, it inspires groups and movements across the Middle East and beyond, proving that it is possible to defy a superpower and survive. This message is especially potent in a region where many populations feel oppressed or betrayed by Western powers, what the world had giving our influence far greater than its military budget or economic strength would suggest. Moreover, Iran's leaders have used this willpower strategically, creating a deterrence posture that relies just on conventional or nuclear capabilities, but on the credible threat of enduring and escalating conflict. Targeting what the world had, they signal to adversaries that any attack on Iran will not lead to quick victory, but to a drawn-out and bloody quagmire. This willingness to accept long-term pain gives Iran a form of power that is hard to measure, but impossible to ignoring the power of endurance. It is this power that makes Iran a uniquely daunting adversary in American eyes. The true hidden truth is that America fears Iran not simply for what it has, but for what it cannot be forced to give up, the fierce, most spiritual to endure, resist, and outlast. As long as Iran possesses this unbreakable resolve, every strategy designed to compel submission is destined to fall short, ensuring the conflict remains one of Washington's most intractable challenges.